Hi, my name is Naomi and welcome to My Storytime Kitchen. In this series, I will be cooking original recipes as I take you behind the real-life stories that inspired the short romantic fiction and recipes in my storybooks. Today, we will be preparing the Bad Breakup Brownie, which is a brownie recipe and story inspired by my first really bad breakup when I was a sophomore in high school. The Bad Breakup Brownie is a short story and chocolate brownie recipe inspired by Xavier, who was my first real boyfriend in high school. I met Xavier through kind of weird circumstances. So in my old high school campus, if you have ever went to school in like New York or California or any other big city, usually you know that there are really huge high school buildings with kids, like 4,000 kids, and often the building will be divided into 4 different schools. So that's kind of the setup that I was in high school, and a lot of my friends were. So even if me and my friends didn't go to the same school in the same building, we kind of like, there was like this network of like 20,000 kids throughout 4 buildings in this particular area of the Bronx that knew each other. And so I got introduced through my best friend at the time, who was Lady Chen, to a guy who was at a neighboring school. The name of the school was called Evander Child's Campus, which if you're from the Bronx and you know about Evander and their reputation, you know exactly where this story is going. But at the time I was just an innocent little high school sophomore who was just kind of looking for a boyfriend. So I let my friend set me up on this date with Xavier. The first thing that kind of caught my eye about Xavier was his style. He was super gothic. He was super like into wearing like huge like platform boots, like chains, like black everything. And that was totally opposite of my style. When I was a sophomore in high school, I wore like Hollister and like Abercrombie and Fitch and like was super into like the conventional kind of preppy sort of sense of fitting in, so it wasn't immediately a match at all, but I decided to give it a chance because my friend hooked us up and he seemed really nice. I would say maybe a few weeks into us dating, there started to be like these kind of weird red flags, like, and they weren't typical red flags that like a 15-year-old would pick up on, but now in my hindsight I'm like, wait, no, that was totally fucking off. I would say the first is that Xavier was 18, right? I was a sophomore, I was 15. He had like a lot of money, like an exorbitant amount of money. Like, I don't understand where he got this money from. And it was kind of like this conversation between me and my friends who was like how is Xavier affording this lifestyle? And so there was this rumor that he had gotten an inheritance from an uncle in Africa, but nobody really, it was totally unfounded, you know, that rumor, and everybody kind of assumed that he was just doing sketchy stuff, which at that point in my high school career, I had no idea about what that could even be. So our first date was something really extravagant. I remember he took me to, if you guys know the Candle Cafe, I know my New York City vegans out there, the Candle Cafe is one of my favorite restaurants to this day. It's right by 3rd Avenue on the Upper East Side, and it's completely vegan, American style food. So I remember going there and it's like $75 for 2 people to have dinner. It's like, what high school kid can afford that? So it was like kind of things like that. And I remember another one of our first dates, it was insane. Like, we went to this old, like super old toy store called FAO Schwartz. And at FAO Schwartz, it's kind of like, if you've ever heard of it, it's based on well, it used to be based on 5th Avenue. It closed a few years ago. And their specialty was like these super grand, like, luxury toys for children. So after our first kind of big date at Candle Cafe, we walked over to FAO Schwartz and he bought me a $300 puppy bear. Penelope the Pup. You can actually look that up. Penelope the Pup is a thing. It's $300 for the biggest one, and I was at 15 like, oh, okay, like this is normal, like I guess this is okay. But no, it was not okay. It was not normal at all. Fast forward, I would say like 2 or 3 months into the relationship. What do men want usually with younger women? He kind of started gearing the conversation toward, let's have sex, like, you know what I mean? And at the time I was, and maybe a lot of you guys who grew up in like the Hannah Montana, Jonas Brothers, Camp Rock era, you will remember that there was such a huge surge of like purity ring wearing. And I was one of those typical, like, totally had Disney up my ass. I was wearing a purity ring at the same time that kind of like Demi Lovato and Miley Cyrus and the Jonas Brothers, like all these celebrities were speaking out about the idea that it was such a good idea to remain pure until marriage, and I was so on board with that. But my new boyfriend Xavier was not, and he made that very clear. And I think that those things kind of came to the fore one night when my friend Alila had her Sweet 16. One of my really, really good friends from high school was having a Sweet 16 party, and I kind of asked him to be my date, and he was just like kind of feeling, not feeling it, like kind of hinting that he didn't want to go with me because I was just the virgin who wanted to stay that way. And I was like, okay, I was a little petty savage child, I'll admit it. So when he said that, I was just kind of like, okay, so you want to break up with me because I want to stay a virgin, huh? Okay. So this is so horrible of me. I'm like, I can't even believe I'm saying this, but I called his best friend. I called his best friend and I was like, look, Xavier doesn't want to go with me. Like, do you want to go? And he's like, yeah, like, sure. So he makes the commute like this. I know not everybody who's watching this is going to be in New York City, but if you know New York City pretty well, you know that if I ask you to be at a party in Queens and your main place of residence is the Bronx, like that's a travel for you. So literally we were in Queens, you know, at the Sweet 16, and I'm calling my, you know, boyfriend's best friend, and I'm like, hey, what's up? Like, are you on your way? And he's like, no, dude, like I'm totally lost. Like I'm trying to get from the Bronx. And then mind you, he's a kid, so he doesn't really know the system that well. And so long story short, he doesn't make it. But somehow word gets out that he was on his way to be my date. And subsequently, Xavier finds out. And because of the whole school building system where it's like all these different kind of kids in different areas, I never personally witnessed this, but somebody from the Evander Childs campus texted me at my campus, and I used to go to Christopher Columbus High School. Not the actual high school, it was just one school in that building, but basically the campus was named Christopher Columbus. Somebody from Evander Childs texted me at Christopher Columbus and was like, hey, just so you know, a huge fight broke out at lunch today, and it was Xavier and his best friend, and it was supposedly about you. And I was like, uh-oh. Like, you know what I mean? It was kind of one of those moments was like, I probably could have made a better decision, you know? But I was just so pissed, and I feel like that's what happens in high school. You just get so angry where you're just like vindictive, and that totally actually happens when you're an adult too. So it was kind of like one of those things, and I just didn't believe that anybody should ever be fighting over me, and I just didn't want it to happen like that. But it did, and it ended very violently. And I remember my friends, like my best girlfriend at the time, Normally, who was also a purity ring wearer, she was kind of like on my side with this. She called Xavier, and she's like, leave Naomi alone. Like, you are such a jerk. Leave her alone. We don't care if you fight. Like, we don't care what happens. Just leave her alone. And so that was my first really bad breakup when I was 15 years old. Very dramatic, very just New York, because it was just so extra. And I think that it really did do a good job inspiring the fictional story that I did end up writing based on that, which is about a high school freshman named Selena who is dating the most popular guy in school whose name is Brandon, and he's like this hot, awesome athlete, right? Has everything that the girls want. But he's kind of trying to pressure her, and you read about this, if you can look at the book in the description, you'll read about how he kind of tries to peer pressure her and make her feel less cool for not being, you know, more willing to share that part of herself. And I think it was really important to write about, just because I feel like that's such a common theme in high school, and now the whole purity ring, you know, trend is over, and the whole craze is over between all these celebrities. You know, nobody even talks about it anymore. But I think that it's so important to bring that to the fore, bring that conversation to the fore, because yes, it's awesome and amazing to have sex in high school. Like, if you want to, do it. But if you don't, like, you are so not any less cool than somebody who does. And I'm not even saying that as somebody who believes in abstinence a lot. Like, for example, and I'll put a link in the description below, I actually wrote an article once I graduated high school about my decision to stop wearing a purity ring, because I think that, again, it's just something that it's a personal choice, and it should be private, and it doesn't necessarily have to do with anybody else. But if you would like to check that out, the link is in the description below, as well as the link in the description to my book, Bittersweet Breakups. And if you would like to read the fictional story that was inspired by my escapades with Xavier, you can check that out. Thanks.